Hello, non-feminist men and women of the world. Today is Monday, the 10th of August, 2015. Welcome to episode number 59 of the Vanguard Report. The Vanguard Report is for high-level strategic thinkers. This is not for checker players. This is for chess players. Around here, we are very, very meta. We take the long game view of the situation, the mountaintop view. Okay, so now let's review our catechism, shall we? In other words, let's review the basics. It's always good to review the basics. Here on the Vanguard Report, everything we talk about, well, almost, is informed by three foundational questions. Number one, what is feminism? Number two, where do we stand? Number three, what is to be done? Pretty near everything we talk about revolves around one of those three questions or some combination of those three questions. Let's drill down into this. Taking those points one by one, let's expand a bit. Here we go. Number one, what is feminism? Well, there is the definition part of the answer and there is the description part of the answer. And right now, we'll just give you the definition part, because the description part goes on and on. We define feminism as the project to increase the power of women with no stipulated endpoint. One more time. Feminism, the project to increase the power of women with no stipulated endpoint. Increasing the power of women, or as the feminists like to say, empowering women. They're always talking about empowering women. Now, we could discuss, we could argue whether that is a good thing or a bad thing, but one thing we ought to keep in mind is that, well, increasing the power of anybody can lead to an unbalanced situation. Like back in the Cold War, increasing the power of Russia with no stipulated endpoint, or increasing the power of the United States with no stipulated endpoint, leads to an imbalance of power. So if balance of power is an important concept to you, then we have to keep in mind that increasing power unilaterally can lead to a dangerous out of whack situation in general. And it's no different with the feminist project, which is to increase the power of women. Now, moving on, the description part of understanding what feminism is, basically, we need to arrive at a shared state of mind that we call target consensus. We need to be in the same ballpark or on the same page about what feminism is. Maybe not very precisely, but just roughly in general, we need to have a pretty much common vision of what feminism is so that we know we are all operating upon the same target. That's why we call it target consensus. And that may be the biggest question of all right there. We have a lot of people who are anti-feminist or opposed to feminism, but they don't all necessarily mean the same thing when they pronounce the word feminism. There is a confusion of language here. There is a logomachi, a war of words that arises or can arise, and we need to address this. We need to straighten out this messy situation. We need to agree generally on what feminism is. We need to map out the situation. Now, point number two, where do we stand? Well, That's just a matter of keeping up with the latest breaking developments. The situation is always changing. The world around us is always changing. And so on top of our target consensus about the nature of feminism, we have to understand the changing situation in terms of our core definition. And that situation is always changing. It's the situation map. Okay, we're in the war room. You got a situation map there. You're moving the little ships around, or you're moving the little troop icons around, or whatever you got. And you're keeping your eye on the terrain. That is the question of where do we stand. It's very important. And the third point is, what is to be done? That's the great revolutionary question right there. We've got our theory, we've got our current intel, and we need to get in a little something about praxis in order to round this all off. So that's the question of what is to be done. And the question of what is to be done, we've answered that pretty well in the light of what we've discussed, or we are presumed to have discussed under the heading of what is feminism and where do we stand. We next have the procedural or operational catechism, which again is conveniently broken down into a list of 3 items. What is to be done in the long game view of things, the chessboard view of things, the mountaintop view of things, is to dismantle feminism. Just that. And dismantling feminism, well, what does that mean to dismantle feminism? Well, that gets into the question of what is feminism in the first place. Then it gets into the question of what does it mean to dismantle it? And there's a lot of discussion that could spin out of that. But we've broken it down into 3 simple points that will help us to navigate and to help us get oriented. How to dismantle feminism, the operational or procedural catechism. 1, expose its lies. 2, reveal the persistent behavior of its participants. 3, show the damage it has inflicted on the world. Those 3 points wrap up our entire program, and the rest of it breaks down into details and details within details. But when it all gets too confusing and your head starts to spin out of control, come back to these 3 points. 1, expose feminism's lies. 2, reveal the persistent behavior of feminism's participants. 3, show the damage feminism has inflicted on the world. There is a wealth of stuff to be talked about here, a lot of meat to chew on. And I'm not going to chew on it now because I want to move along. Anyway, in the end, taking the long game chessboard view of things, we need to achieve target consensus so that we know what we're working on, what our target of operations is. And in having done that, we need to have a convergence of vectors, an orchestrated effect all across society. Many groups and individuals everywhere working in concert with each other. Remember that feminism is a complex social system with interacting parts, and what we are doing is no less of a complex social system with interacting parts. So, target consensus and the convergence of vectors upon the target of operations. That wraps it up for now. That's our catechism lesson for the day. And that's the opening monologue for Vanguard Report number 59. Moving into the program now, I am your host, Fiedelbogen. My fellow host, Nick Redding, man of Canada, true son of the Alberta Prairie, is not here today. Nick is away on personal business today. And in fact, Nick will be away for this episode, and I think for the following 2 episodes after this. That would be episode 60 and episode 61. So it's going to be just me here for this and the following 2 weeks, unless I decide to surprise you and find a fellow host for one of those episodes. I may or may not do that. But anyway, today it's just me. And Nick will be back in 2 or 3 weeks, and life will go on. Oh, be sure you all go and visit the website of mensrightsedmonton.com. That is the website that Nick runs. And go there, look at all the good stuff there. And if you are in the Edmonton, Alberta area, or if you live there, or you plan to be passing through there, or you know somebody there, and you can pass the word along to them, well, look for the contact information on the Men's Rights Edmonton website and get a hold of Nick. You want to go hang out with Nick and talk about matters pertaining to throwing feminism into the same disrepute as racism. That is Nick's endgame. He wants to put feminism in the same disrepute as racism. And that sounds like not a bad goal. You know, I think I can rubber stamp that as well. So, speaking of Nick and speaking of Edmonton, just the other day, which day was that? Oh, yes, it was Saturday, the 8th of August. That was just the day before yesterday. They had a slut walk in Edmonton. It was a very hot summer day up there in Edmonton, I'm told. It was just sweltering. But anyway, they had a slut walk. And Nick was there, not only Nick, but Nick and a whole bunch of his posse turned out. And they had a surprise guest, no less than, are you ready? Lauren Southern of Rebel Media, Libertarian candidate in Vancouver. Lauren Southern, I'm sure you've all heard about Lauren Southern. If you haven't, well, I suggest you come out from under that rock that you're under. Nick and Lauren Southern and the whole Men's Rights Edmonton posse, Nick and allies, were all there for the slut walk. They turned out and made a little counter demonstration of their own at the slut walk. I wish I could tell you more. At this point in time, I don't have very many details, but there will be more details forthcoming in the days ahead. Anyway, Nick tells me that this year's slut walk was small compared to previous years, and that the feminists were comparatively well behaved compared to previous years. It could be because it was so hot and they just didn't feel very inspired to show up. I don't know. But whatever the reason, it wasn't much of a slut walk. It was a pretty tame slut walk this year, so I'm told, and I still await more details. Now, look at cue number 1 on your cue list. You go there. There is a short video with Nick and Lauren Southern, and just talking about things. It's about 1 minute long, maybe a minute and a half long. Anyway, cue number 1, go there. It's on YouTube. Go take a look. And this is certainly interesting. Lauren Southern is a celebrity, if ever there was one, a celebrated person, in other words. And now we see alliances and linkages beginning to form. This is nice. And I think there will be more stuff on Rebel Media pertaining to the Edmonton slut walk in the near future. Moving up next to cue number 2, or rather, Q2, item 2 on your Q list. Sargon of Akkad, a YouTuber, non-feminist YouTuber, who takes on feminists and social justice warrior stupidity in general, has come under attack. He's very popular, gets a lot of views on YouTube, and he is under attack. There are some feminists / social justice warriors who are trying to wreck his personal life. Apparently, they're denouncing him to his significant other. Whatever it is, it's nefarious. And cue number 2, there's a little taste of what they're doing there. We got to remember that there is a spectrum of feminist violence. Not all of it is physical violence. Most of it is emotional, spiritual, psychological violence, calling you bad names or trying to destroy your good name, along that spectrum of operations. But whatever, feminists are violent people, mostly psychologically violent, but you push them to an extreme, get them into a corner, and they will become physically violent as well. And this will become increasingly the case as time goes on, and as the non-feminist, anti-feminist side of this conflict begins to swing into ascendancy more and more, and the feminists are going to get more and more desperate, and they're going to start to do some crazy things. So everybody look out, have a care. We're dealing with some crazy people here. We're dealing with some, in some cases, real sociopathic fruitcakes. That's feminism. It draws those kinds of people like bees to a honeycomb. Next, cue number 3. I'm going to share an article with you here. This is more about domestic violence. Now that we've mentioned feminist violence, well, on the theme of violence in general, feminists like to lie about other people's violence. While the boiling cauldron within themselves is bubbling away, they're screaming about the violence of other people, and in particular, the violence of the male half of the human race. They love to bang on and on about male violence. And the core of that rhetoric is, of course, domestic violence. Men in domestic relationships, dating relationships, husbands, boyfriends, or what have you, are apparently beastly animals toward their women. This is the feminist narrative. I'm going to share this article. This is from a website called medicaldaily.com. Domestic violence against men. Women more likely to be intimate terrorists with controlling behavior in relationships. Boy, this exactly spins the feminist narrative around 180 degrees. But this seems to be the trend. Women are more violent than men. I'm not greedy. I'm not out to say that women are more violent than men. I'm happy to just split the violence 50-50 and call it quits right there. I'm happy to say that men and women are about equally violent in domestic relationships, but there is a certain amount of science, a certain amount of research that's kind of drifting in the direction of concluding that women are actually more violent than men. This is what a lot of researchers seem to be concluding now. So, reading the article here, relationships can be an emotional roller coaster. Throughout the ride, men and women can be everything from loving and nurturing to sometimes verbally and even physically abusive during fights. While aggression in heterosexual relationships is believed to stem from men, a recent study presented on June 25th at a symposium on intimate partner violence at the British Psychological Society's Division of Forensic Psychology annual conference in Glasgow found women are more likely to be intimate terrorists or physically aggressive to their partners than men. Michael B. Johnson, an American sociologist, coined the term intimate terrorism or batterers or abusers in the 1990s to define an extreme form of controlling relationship behavior involving threats, intimidation, and violence. Side note, threats, intimidation, violence, that sounds like feminist behavior toward anybody who questions feminism or claims not to be a feminist or what have you. Their behavior when something like that crops up is threatening, intimidating, and violent. All right. Men were almost always responsible for these heinous acts, according to the feminist narrative. This belief is further supported by statistics highlighting, whoops, something popped up on my screen. I can't read the article anymore. Okay, I got rid of it. Men were almost always responsible for these heinous acts. This belief is further supported by statistics highlighting nearly 3 in 10 women, 29%, and 1 in 10 men, 10% in the U.S., have experienced rape, physical violence, and or stalking by a partner, affecting some form of their functioning, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And by the way, those figures just given could be questioned. Could be that women are doing more of this stuff than what those figures would suggest, but I won't get into that now. Oops, my browser. Okay, to observe the dynamic and prevalence of intimate partner violence of men and women in heterosexual relationships, Dr. Elizabeth Bates from the University of Cumbria and colleagues from the University of Central Lancashire conducted a survey collecting data from a large cohort of students. More than 1,000 students, 706 women and 398 men, with an average age of 24, responded to the questionnaires. The students were asked about their physical aggression and controlling behavior to partners and to same-sex others, including friends. The findings revealed just as many women as men could also be classed as abusive, coupled with controlling behavior with serious levels of threats, intimidation, and physical violence. Women were more likely to verbally and physically aggressive. I think that meant to say women were more likely to be verbally and physically aggressive to their partners than men. This study found that women demonstrated a desire to control their partners and were more likely to use physical aggression than men. It wasn't just pushing and shoving, said Bates, Medical Express reported. Some of the survey respondents circled boxes for things like beating up, kicking, and even threatening to use a weapon. However, when it came to terms of high levels of control and aggression, there was no difference between men and women. I will read that sentence again. However, when it came to terms of high levels of control and aggression, there was no difference between men and women. There was a higher prevalence of controlling behavior seen in women than men, which was found to significantly predict physical aggression in both sexes. Okay, controlling behavior that is on a spectrum of violence. Begins with controlling behavior and escalates from there. In other words, the more controlling behavior a woman displayed, the more likely she would be, that means to say, the more likely she would be an intimate terrorist or physically aggressive to her partner. Well, that makes sense. Controlling behavior, you're trying to control somebody, and controlling them physically is just a step up on the ladder of control overall. So I can see how that escalates. And I personally think that women and men are about equal or exactly equal in their desire to control other people. Now, feminism would have you believe that men want to control other people and women don't. Women just want to sit back and let other people do whatever other people want to do, but men want to reach out and control them. That's what feminism would have you believe. Feminism would have you believe that this proclivity is more pronounced in men than it is in women. And of course, we have good reason to believe that that's not the case. However, when it came to terms of high levels of control and aggression, there was no difference between men and women. Oh, I read that paragraph. Let's move along here. This was an interesting finding. Previous studies have sought to explain male violence towards women as rising from patriarchal values. Previous studies have sought to explain male violence toward women as arising from patriarchal values, which motivate men to seek to control women's behavior using violence if necessary. This neglects to say previous feminist studies. They left out that all-important critical little F word there. It should have said previous feminist studies have sought to explain male violence toward women as rising from patriarchal values, etc., etc. But no, they didn't say that. You see how feminism is just simply taken for granted as the default frame of reference in our culture these days. We don't have to point out feminism as feminism. It's just assumed. Previous feminist studies have sought to explain, etc., etc. Now that's better. This suggests IPV, meaning intimate partner violence, may not be motivated by patriarchal values. Well, if women do it too, I wouldn't think it would be motivated by patriarchal values, unless you're going to theorize that men do it for reasons of patriarchal values and women don't, even if they both do it equally. Men are being patriarchal when they're doing these things, and women are being some other kind of archal, but not patriarchal. I don't know. This suggests IPV may not be motivated by patriarchal values and should be further studied with other forms of aggression. The stereotypical popular view, although still dominant, is being challenged by research over the last 10 to 15 years, shedding light on male domestic violence. Hello? Challenged by research over the last 10 to 15 years. I need to correct that. Their research goes back a good third of a century. In fact, you could push that research all the way back to Aaron Pitsey circa 1970, which is closer to half of a century. So anything you read in any media anywhere, take it with a grain of salt. It's not necessarily the truth or the entire truth. So this is the stereotypical popular view. Well, apparently the stereotypical popular view is the feminist view, because the view that they're describing here is very much the feminist view. The stereotypical popular view, although still dominant, is being challenged. Okay, this is the dominant stereotypical popular view, i.e. the feminist view, is being challenged by research over the last 10 to 15 years, no, closer to half a century, shedding light on male domestic violence. You see, what feminists have done, what feminist research has done, is look for evidence that men are the bad guys. Men are the malefactors. That's the whole purpose of feminist research. Anything with the word feminist added into it, feminist research, feminist this, feminist that, is for the purpose of advancing the feminist agenda and upholding the feminist narrative, the narrative which is attached to that agenda. Mark Brooks, chair of the Mankind Initiative in the UK, which offers support for male victims of domestic violence, believes Bates' study is, quote unquote, game-changing. Well, I dare say it is, just as Aaron Pitsey's work was game-changing. It didn't change the game, at least not right away. At the charity, we're not surprised at the findings because of the type of calls we get to our helpline every day. Hello, Aaron Pitsey. Aaron Pitsey could have told you this back in 1970. Oops, browser fluctuations again. Now I'm losing my place in the text. Okay. At the charity, we're not surprised at the findings because of the type of calls we get to our helpline every day, Brooks told The Telegraph. What concerns us still is the lack of awareness and services available to support those men suffering in this way. Finally, something to counter the feminist narrative is getting into the mainstream narrative. Feminists are going to fight like demons to stop that, but they're going to be on the wrong side of history. Okay. I feel so smug using that phrase. It is no surprise that the media and government in the US and throughout other parts of the world, people focus most attention on the female victims of domestic violence, and consequently, men are the overlooked victims of domestic violence. Interesting choice of words. People focus most attention. Well, it's feminists initially who focused that attention, and they narrated that narrative to people, meaning the general public, and people sopped it up and believed it. So the feminist view is the mainstream view. Even people who would not call themselves feminists, who would say, I'm not a feminist, they have imbibed so much of the feminist worldview into their own thought patterns. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, men and boys are less likely to report the violence and seek services due to several challenges, such as the stigma of being a male victim. 16% of adult men who report being raped or physically assaulted are victims of a current or former spouse, cohabiting partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, or date. And that's the end of the article. Very interesting article. It's just one more rock in the river to change the course of the river and to alter the channel of the river and get the river flowing in a new direction. But yeah, the feminist male violence narrative, patriarchal terrorism narrative, call it what you will, that narrative is unraveling. That narrative is coming unglued little by little. Oh, they're still fighting it. But to me, the feminist DV narrative is the keystone of the arch. It's one of the most important things in this whole struggle. Once that narrative comes down, a whole lot of other things are going to come down too. A lot of feminism's credibility and moral clout is invested one way or another in this domestic violence narrative. So it's good to see this narrative under attack. I know that sounds violent. Anyway, moving along. Moving along. I have a question to pose to anybody and everybody, but most of all to feminists themselves. Can feminism coexist with the rest of the world? That means all of us who are not feminist. And in a broader sense, everything in the universe which does not comport with feminist theory in one way or another, for one reason or another. There's a lot of stuff out there in the universe that just does not square with feminism. And the question is, can feminism coexist or continue to exist alongside of all that? So that we have feminism existing here and we have the rest of the universe existing sort of next to it. And those two entities achieve some kind of an understanding, some kind of a balance, and they go forward into the future with each side continuing to exist without one side or the other encroaching upon the other. This is just a question that I put out for consideration. Can feminism coexist with the rest of the world? The great line in the sand that we now must draw is the line which separates feminist from non-feminist. It should be self-evident that not everybody on earth shares the feminist way of understanding the human condition. And that is how we mark the boundary between these two sets of people, or these two sectors of the universe. In the last year or two, we have seen a dramatic upsurge in mainstream anti-feminism. Mainstream anti-feminism. That's a whole new set of people getting into the game here. Quite frankly, these new people are just as fed up with feminism as the old timers have been for years. They feel that feminism has jumped the shark, and they are getting more and more outspoken about their disenchantment. Now, since we are talking to the feminists themselves here, along with everybody else, of course, we ought to pose a very fundamental question for their consideration. Feminist, what do you intend to do about this? Seriously, what do you feminists intend to do about the present situation? How do you plan to address all of this? People are getting fed up with you, and they are mobilizing with reinforcements arriving daily. Will you treat these developments with the seriousness they deserve? Or will you slough it off, act like nothing is happening, bury your head in the sand, and carry on with business as usual? Now, the present situation is unique. The present situation is new and different. We're not talking about the so-called men's rights movement anymore. It goes far beyond that now. That's an unnecessarily limited view of things. We're talking about something much bigger. We're talking about a fundamental shift of perspective in the population at large, and a whole new way of thinking to go along with this. Let's be clear on one thing for starters. We're not a bit happy about the pernicious effect which feminist innovation has had upon men and boys. Let this be well understood. We know that men and boys are ground zero in feminist plans. That reality is never far from our thoughts. We haven't forgotten about what feminism is doing to half of the human race. That's huge. However, our thoughts go further, for we cannot ignore that men and women live in the same social ecosystem. Hence, the effect of feminist innovation does not stop with men. The web of cause and effect spreads in all directions. And if bad things happen to men, surely nothing good will follow for women. Everything's connected, right? By the end of the day, we are worried about the effect which feminism has upon everybody, the entire human community. You feminists must understand that we outnumber you, we, the rest of the human race, the non-feminist sector. That is why we call ourselves the non-feminist majority, because we've got the numbers. Furthermore, you are gravely mistaken if you think we are naught but empty space and empty minds fit only to be filled with feminism. Is that how you see us? Yes, that is how you see us. But in fact, we are a complex tapestry of life, ripe with meaning and mystery. So get that in your head, feminist. Get that in your head. We are not you. We are different from you. We have eyes, our own eyes, not yours. This means that we are seeing you in ways that you feminists cannot hope to see yourselves. And we've got some highly original opinions about what we see. We are everywhere. We are gazing into feminism's soul, and we are discussing what we are seeing there, whether you like it or not, whether you like it or not. These conversations are happening, and they will happen. It will continue to happen. That's right. Feminism, the abyss is gazing into you now. How does that feel? The abyss is gazing into you. Don't tell us to look in the dictionary in order to learn what feminism is. You can't put us off with that stale old crap anymore. We can see plain as day what feminism is. After all, we've had half a century to do this. The truth about feminism, the home truth I mean, is not written on a book page, but painted on the canvas of this world in tall red letters, impossible to miss if you're not trying to miss it. But no, we have not missed a bit of it. So feminists, we put it to you one more time. What do you plan to do about this? You are in trouble for a reason. Your actions and policies for many years have brought you to this point, and more of the same will only dig you in deeper. Is that what you want? We are not feminist. We will never be feminist. Nothing can make that happen. And if you try to force feminism upon other people, you will only make things worse for yourself. Think about that. Are you looking for advice? Well, here it is, ready or not. Feminism must gaze into a mirror long and hard and learn to see itself for the very first time ever. Here, let us help. We've got the mirror. And if you just sit still, we shall be happy to hold that mirror up in front of your face if you don't want to do it for yourselves. In fact, we've been doing that very thing for many years, but you feminists never knew this because you never wanted to know it. Self-knowledge is a bitch sometimes, eh? Be aware that the mirror we hold in front of you does not reflect the face that worldly vanity and self-conceit might depict to itself. No, this is a magical mirror which blows that face away and exposes the naked soul behind it. Feminist, are you ready for such a thing? Are you ready to gaze upon your own naked soul? We non-feminist men and women understand feminism better than feminism understands itself. You might say that this is our secret weapon, and yet, ironically, it is no secret at all. Certainly, we have never tried to conceal it. We're happy to share what we know about feminism, and we shall propagate this knowledge ever and always. So if there is any element of secrecy here, it is that feminism keeps this knowledge secret from itself. From itself, by a continual and strenuous exertion. That is what the flight from self-knowledge requires, a continual and strenuous exertion. That's hard work to avoid self-knowledge, really hard. Call it willful ignorance. You cannot know what you will not know, for if the will is lacking, the way cannot be found. Feminists, you might wonder why we address you in this manner. We have suggested, quite simply, that you've lost your way because you fail to know yourselves. Other people can see right through you, yet you persist in not knowing yourselves. For some reason, you prefer to fob that work off on other people. They're getting tired of it, and you're just plain lazy. Well, that's a hazardous condition, don't you think so? It means that other people have got the edge over you, and they will steadily advance upon you in the course of time and ultimately gain the upper hand. Feminists, let me put you straight with some real talk. If you want to stem the rising tide of anti-feminism, there is only one trick that will work. You must alter your behavior in such a way that you don't turn people against you. In other words, you must stop creating anti-feminists in the first place. Anti-feminism is your fault. Anti-feminism is your creation. Stop whining and ranting against anti-feminism because you're making it happen more than anybody else. Now, it is true that everybody is either a feminist or a non-feminist, okay? That's the bedrock binary right there. Either you're a feminist or you're not. But while an anti-feminist is still a non-feminist, the anti-feminist has a little something extra, certain modifications, if you will. And it's on you, the feminist, to see that those modifications never happen. Only you can prevent anti-feminism. It's your job, not theirs. You want the TLDR version? Fine. I'll let you have it in 3 words. Listen and believe. Ever heard that phrase before? Listen and believe. When non-feminist people try to tell you what feminism is doing wrong, you must listen to them and believe them. You might think that these people don't know what feminism really is, but I can assure you that they do. In fact, they know better than you what feminism really is. They know this because they know what you refuse to know. It's that self-knowledge thing again. So, sending non-feminist people to the dictionary for the 14 billionth time won't work, as if they've never heard that before. Calling non-feminist people terrible names like sexist or misogynist or rape apologist won't work. It won't convince them that feminism is the way to go, especially if those accusations are unfounded, which they typically are. It will only work if you are trying to create more anti-feminists, and for that purpose, it will work like a charm. Propagating debunked or dubious ideas such as rape culture or male privilege or patriarchal terrorism or the misleadingly named wage gap won't work. Too many people don't believe that stuff anymore, so you will turn those people against feminism because you are repping for feminism in a very shabby way. You're making feminism look like a big fat liar. Okay, is that how you want feminism to look? Is that how you want to rep for feminism? Well, then keep it up. Telling non-feminist women that they are stupid, ungrateful, internalized misogynists won't work. I guarantee that if you don't lay off those women, they will learn to curse you like a pack of bloody pirates. And the last thing feminism needs is women cursing it like a pack of bloody pirates. I could go on with these examples, but I'm sure you get the point. Let me repeat. When non-feminist people try to tell you what feminism is doing wrong, you must listen to them and believe them. You might think that these people don't know what feminism really is, but I can assure you that they do. In fact, they know better than you what feminism really is. They know this because they know what you refuse to know. You feminists seem to have an information deficit, but non-feminist people can supply that lack if only you let them. One more time, listen and believe. As a feminist, you'll never learn anything new about feminism if you don't listen to what non-feminist people say and believe what they say. Listen and believe. That's how you supply the missing information about feminism, the information you haven't got. What makes you so dead certain that other people don't know the truth about feminism? Who gave you the authority to pontificate about that? Seriously now, who gave you that authority? Well, I think it's time to wrap this up. Feminism is not the world, okay? It's just a part of the world, but it's not the world. The world is the world. And if feminism disappeared into a black hole tomorrow, the world would carry on with no regrets and be none the worse for the loss. Nor would life for women take any dramatic nosedive if feminism suddenly disappeared. In fact, life for women would stay pretty much the same, and any slight modification would, in all probability, be for the better. So if you're a feminist, and if you want to keep your religion alive, you will need to make peace with the non-feminist sector. You can't afford to make enemies in that sector. You are not the only game in town anymore, and it's time you modified your conduct accordingly. So don't make enemies. In other words, don't make anti-feminists. If you plan to coexist with the rest of us, learn to negotiate a balance of power. learn to respect our boundaries, and above all, learn to respect our intelligence. When we try to tell you something, listen to what we are saying and believe that we are serious in saying it. Believe that we mean it, because we surely do. Listen and believe. Accept with a good grace that the power to define feminism is no longer your monopoly. Accept with a good grace that non-feminist people possess the missing information in your understanding of feminism. Accept with a good grace that feminism's days of unbridled cultural colonization are over. Accept with a good grace that you will not sell feminism to people by harassing and insulting people. Accept with a good grace that some people will never embrace feminism, no matter how seductive your marketing plan might be. Accept with a good grace that non-feminist lives matter, and that non-feminist people have an inner life of their own, which is precious to them. Accept all these things and many more with a good grace. Then settle down, keep your feminism to yourself, and learn to coexist with your non-feminist neighbors. Is that even possible for you to do? I guess we'll find out. Thank you, feminists. Think about what you just heard. Well, now let's go to cue number 4 on your cue list there. This is something about the case in Ontario with Gregory Elliot and, what was her name? Stephanie Guthrie, the feminist. Okay. This is a pretty big case. It has really big implications. It started off with some obscure young fellow way off in northern Ontario somewhere who made a little online video game that featured punching Anita Sarkeesian in the face. Well, some feminists got wind of this, and in particular, the feminist Stephanie Guthrie, or Steph Guthrie. And Steph Guthrie went on a one-woman crusade against this poor little nobody way up in northern Ontario. He decided to dox him and out him and turn the world against him and do whatever she could to wreck his life on account of this crappy little video game that he created, which was, I grant you, arguably in poor taste. But Steph Guthrie, the feminist, wishes to wreak violence upon this little nobody and destroy his life. The article in question that we're looking at right now, this is cue number 4. I hope I said it right before. Cue number 4, that's the cue number we're looking at here. Regardless of the verdict in the Guthrie case, we've already lost. This is in the National Post of Canada. An emotionally charged criminal harassment case whose outcome, according to National Post columnist Christy Blatchford, risks serious ramifications for freedom of speech online. Dates back to 2012. That was the year when Stephanie Guthrie decided to punish Bendel and Spur. And let me interject here. Bendel and Spur was the young man who designed the Punch Anita Sarkeesian in the Face video game. I didn't really complete the narrative just now. I should have said that this fellow, Gregory Elliot, a graphic designer in Toronto, took exception to what Steph Guthrie was doing to Bendel and Spur, took Steph Guthrie to task, called her out for it. In other words, he disagreed with a feminist. And this feminist, Stephanie Guthrie, went on a vengeance ride against Gregory Elliot and tried to get him thrown in jail for making threats. There has been a terrible campaign against Gregory Elliot, and from the best information we can gather, he's not a bad guy. He just didn't like what Stephanie Guthrie was doing to this young man, Bendlin Spur. So the real focus right now is on Steph Guthrie and Gregory Elliot. Let me go on with the article. Spur, a young man from Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, created a disturbing video game entitled Beat Up Anita Sarkeesian, in which players punch an image of the noted feminist in the face with bloody results. The game delighted a self-styled group of quote-unquote men's rights activists, online commentators on perpetual watch for what they perceive as feminist provocations. Okay. If MRAs are the extreme end of an increasingly savage online culture war, Guthrie and her fellow co-complainant, Heather Riley, are their natural enemies. Let's stop right here. Savage online culture war. It's not an online culture war. That is deceivingly worded there. It is just a culture war. We should redact the word online and just say an increasingly savage culture war. Okay. And the extreme end, okay, well, maybe they are the extreme end. And the feminists are the other extreme end. What we see shaping up here is a narrative of MRAs versus feminists. The mythical group of people called MRAs squaring off against feminists with the nice, sensible, normal people caught in the middle. Okay, this is the narrative that's now coming into focus generally, if you keep an eye on these things like I do. Let's see. Guthrie and her fellow co-complainant, Heather Riley, are their natural enemies. Engaged and prominent online feminists, both have been subjected to threats and harassment by MRAs, especially after they targeted Spur. Some of the abuse leveled at her from these activists, although not from the defendant in this case, was profoundly horrific. Now, here I have to interject again. Abuse leveled at her from these activists. What we have here is a pretty standard trick of unsupported accusations against unnamed people. We don't know who these activists are. We are simply led to believe that there is some coherent group of people out there who have been labeled with the moniker MRAs, and that this coherent group of people has very demonstrably and singularly directed this activity at the feminist activists. In the first place, we don't know how much of this online abuse was actually happening, and we don't know how much of it was truly horrific or not, because different people have a different idea of what is horrific or not horrific. So we really don't know. And as far as these quote unquote activists, well, that could be anybody. Anybody out there could be sending allegedly abusive comments to some feminist somewhere. But what they're trying to do here is to craft a narrative where there is an actual group of people, a targetable, tangible group of people whom they label MRAs, who are some kind of villains in this set piece drama. The real truth is far more fluid, far more organic, and far more complex. But I guess that doesn't produce very well to the soundbite world of popular journalism, so I guess they can't give you that kind of nuance. Nevertheless, this is what the public is being fed. Okay, here we go. If MRAs are the extreme end of an increasingly savage online culture war, Guthrie and her fellow co-complainant Heather Riley are their natural enemies. Engaged and prominent online feminists. Gee, they don't live in the real world, they just live inside computer wires. Both have been subjected to threats and harassment by MRAs, whoever MRAs is, we don't even know, especially after they targeted Spur. Some of the abuse leveled at her from these activists, although not from the defendant in this case, was profoundly horrific. So much so that in May 2014, Blatchford, the journalist, wrote, "There isn't a female writer in the world, probably, who isn't routinely inundated with this sort of misogynist hate mail. Social media has There isn't a female writer in the world who isn't routinely inundated with misogynist hate mail. I doubt that. I'm sure there are a lot of female writers who don't get hate mail, misogynist or otherwise. That's a pretty broad scattergun statement to be making there. Social media has only made a cruel old world more so for everyone, but the viciousness of the communications my female colleagues and I receive, particularly when we dare to take a contrarian view of something, is stunning. Well, it seems to me like a lot of those abusive emailers are also taking a contrarian view of things. When you hear the word contrarian, you got to ask, well, contrary to what? While I am inured to it, it enrages me that Ms. Guthrie, just 29 and such a bold spirit, should feel it too. I can't tell you how sad this made me. This truly great young woman is being subjected to this stuff. Well, Steph Guthrie is not such a great young woman. She's a slime ball, okay, but I won't say any more at the moment. Under attack from the MRAs, whoever that is, Guthrie fought back, suggesting a doxing campaign against Spur, internet slang for publishing his personal information and contacting his employers to make them aware of his online behavior. It was this step that would form the crux of the fight between Guthrie and Gregory Elliot. Elliot is regarded by many as a notorious Twitter troll, an online commenter who deliberately, often profanely, seeks to provoke a hostile reaction. Well, another word for that would be a gadfly. And one of the most famous gadflies in history was Socrates. So, trolling is on a spectrum with Socrates, really, if you take a broader view of it. Elliot strongly disagreed with Guthrie's tactics and said so crassly numerous times. Guthrie took steps to block Elliot from accessing her tweets, but he was able to largely circumvent them and continue engaging with her and her online compatriots. It is those online activities that constitute the alleged stalking and harassment. Well, I'm glad they put the word alleged in there. Elliot has also been charged with breaking a peace bond in relation to his sustained tweeting. Now, I took the trouble to read all of the online tweet history between Guthrie and Steph Guthrie and Gregory Allen Elliot and some of the other complainants. And I looked at it, and there was nothing really, really, really so terrible about any of it. The worst I could say is that Gregory Allen Elliot was annoying at times. At certain points, it was even friendly, because prior to the Bendel and Spur affair cropping up, Elliot and Steph Guthrie had a fairly collegial relationship. But no, I can't say, based on the evidence that I've seen, that Gregory Allen Elliot has really done anything terrible. He's not made any threats. Being annoying is the worst thing you could say about some of the things that he said. If MRAs are the extreme end of an increasingly savage online culture war, oh, I'm sorry, I read that already, didn't I? Strike out the word online. If MRAs, whoever MRAs is, are the extreme end of an increasingly savage culture war, Guthrie and her fellow co-complainant are their natural enemies. A verdict in this matter is expected in the fall. Blatchford has been covering the proceedings for the years that they have ground on. In her past writings, while never masking her exasperation for the behavior of all parties involved, she seemed empathetic to Guthrie. That was until last week. In a column that drew heated online criticism, Blatchford called Guthrie's perceived vulnerability into question, doubting just how much Guthrie felt she was at risk. Bing, 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 bing. Here we go. Doubting just how much Guthrie felt she was at risk. Guthrie is a feminist. Stephanie Guthrie is a feminist, and that's the first thing we need to know about Stephanie Guthrie, and the main thing we need to know about her. We are entitled to doubt the good faith, the sincerity, the basic truthfulness of any feminist anywhere. That's just a default position. for any dealing with a feminist or with feminism in general is this person lying? Is this person twisting and playing games with the truth? Is this person laying it on thick or whatever? We've always got to be suspicious of any feminist anywhere because they lie a lot, and that is the core of their whole modus operandi. Specifically, she, Blatchford, wrote, "The criminal harassment charge is rooted in the alleged victim's perception of the offending conduct." There you go. There's another magic keyword right there. Perception. They perceive certain things. I perceive that to be hostile. I perceive that to be threatening. Okay? It's feelings. It's emotional reasoning. The criminal harassment charge is rooted in the alleged victim's perception of the offending conduct. If the alleged victims reasonably, in all the circumstances, fear for their safety, that's good enough. Okay? The whole case turns upon that little word, reasonably. Could they reasonably fear for their safety? And that's very much up in the air. It's very much a matter of interpretation. It's subjective. Did you reasonably fear for your safety? Did you unreasonably fear for your safety? A lot of blurred lines here, a lot of gray area. Elliot's chief sin, Blatchford continues, was that he, quote unquote, dared to disagree with the two young feminists and political activists. There you go. Disagreeing with a feminist will get you in trouble. Now, some of us have known this for years, but it's good to see that fact being put in such a high spotlight now. Okay? Feminists don't like it when you disagree with them. And at an extreme, they will do some pretty extreme things to people who disagree with them, with people who question feminism, people who challenge feminism, or people who merely refuse to be feminist and publicly say so. Feminism does not like opposition. Okay? I think that wraps it all up right there. They do not like opposition, and they ultimately will not tolerate opposition. To suggest, as Blatchford appears to do, that harassment without explicit threats of physical or sexual harm should not qualify as criminal is troublesome. Further, while much of Blatchford's earlier writing on this topic had made clear that Guthrie was unquestionably the target of vile abuse from MRA activists, okay, stop right there. We don't know who these people were that sent the vile abuse. We don't know if they were MRA activists, quote unquote, or not. There were just some people out there. And now somebody here labels those largely unknown people, quote unquote, MRA activists. Okay, and this is just, well, part of a plan to brand anybody who is not a feminist or is publicly critical of feminism. Because if you're publicly critical of feminism, you are conflated or lumped or clumped together with these people called MRAs. Okay, there is a step-by-step transfer, inductive transfer from MRA to anti-feminist to ultimately not a feminist. This is feminism protecting its boundaries and defending itself against any kind of opposition, even intellectual opposition that might arise in the future. Okay, and pointing these things out, you got to really look and think like a microscope to see some of this. But it's worth digging into it with a fine-tooth comb. Although, okay, abuse from MRA activists generally, although not Elliot specifically. Now, is Gregory Allen Elliot, a quote-unquote MRA? There is no reason to think that he is a men's rights activist. He is, by all accounts, a politically leftward-leaning graphic designer. And he might even describe himself as a feminist, I don't know. But I don't think the label MRA would really apply to Elliot. But you see that they're taking in larger and larger targets here. They're basically taking in or targeting anybody who is against them and anybody whom they can plausibly mount a campaign against. But that broader context was largely absent last week. Yes, a columnist only has so many words to cover a topic and content must be sacrificed, but absent a deeper explanation of what Guthrie has sincerely alleged to have endured, it's easy to conclude that there's nothing to see here. And that isn't so. If nothing, pardon me, if nothing else, the fact that the police and Crown pursued charges in the first place suggests the behavior was beyond simple, even rude disagreement, doesn't it? That being said, some of the backlash against Blatchford was misguided, particularly suggestions that Blatchford was personally responsible for online anger directed at Guthrie. Indeed, Guthrie has sadly been the target of that kind of abuse for years. Well, I mean, if people are angry at you for your bad behavior and they speak out about that, is that abuse? Steph Guthrie is a feminist, and we know the kind of behavior that feminists are capable of, and we know that much of that behavior is reprehensible and likely to arouse the anger of people, and yet they want to call that abuse. Well, in this case, I would say, abuser, heal thyself. Or he who is without sin can cast the first stone. And that's a lesson feminism needs to learn. Guthrie may have been subject to yet another barrage of death threats and harassment at the hands of the MRA crowd. Whatever, there you go again. Who is the MRA crowd? A bunch of people, in other words, whom we don't know, in the wake of Blatchford's column. But to suggest Blatchford intentionally incited this retaliation is unfair. Yeah, I would say it's unfair. Nor is Blatchford responsible for a campaign by a group of MRAs to cover Elliot's legal bills, even though the campaign quotes from her writings on the matter. Now, the people who want to cover Elliot's legal bills might, with some justice, be characterized as MRAs, although it would be nice to go and ask those people one by one if that's the label they apply to themselves. But I guess, in journalism, we have to sacrifice content sometimes. I understand that. Though I'm not personally familiar with either complainant, I have admired what I've seen of Guthrie's public persona from afar. Well, I haven't. Guthrie is a feminist and she tells a lot of lies. Anyway, Guthrie and Riley do assuredly belong to a subset of feminists who employ tactics that are not only unhelpful, but terribly counterproductive. Here we go. They perceive themselves to be an online authority of feminism. They play to a virtual audience and engage in a culture of calling out, online mobbing, and doxing. In other words, the pot calling the kettle black here, as it turns out. They justify these actions by relying on the moral certainty of their personal cause. Remember that phrase right there. They justify these actions by relying on the moral certainty of their personal cause. In other words, what is being described in this sentence is what we call feminist triumphalism. Feminism is right. Feminism is, that's it. Feminism is right, and end of conversation. That's feminist triumphalism. That is the moral certainty of their personal cause that's being spoken of here. Throughout the trial, Blatchford reported on the fact that Guthrie copped to her own bullying tactics. See, she admits it. She's been arguably as vindictive online as Elliot himself. It was, after all, with malicious intent that Guthrie sought to sick the internet on spur, testifying that she would not feel sorry if his life were ruined and would feel no sense of responsibility had he been driven to suicide following her call to mob. In her view, he'd have brought it on herself. Okay? This is Stephanie Guthrie, the feminist, acting like a typical feminist. Folks, this is feminism. This is how feminists behave. Do all feminists behave this way? No, there's feminists who don't quite behave this way. But you need to understand that all feminists are part of feminism, and they are all in cahoots, more or less. They are all part of the complex social system of interacting parts called feminism, a system which drives consistently toward a consistent goal. Should charges against Elliot be dismissed, Guthrie and Riley and their group of vocal public supporters will be inundated with more misogynistic attacks from angry, unknown members of the public, whom they call MRAs, okay, from angry members of the public, including threats of rape or murder. Like, for example, someone says, "I hope you get raped," or "I hope somebody kills you." This is coded as a threat to rape or murder, okay? These little nuances get sacrificed in journalism because, of course, a journalist has limited space and not much time for content, all right? It's happened before. It will again. On the other hand, if the judge should rule that Elliot's behavior was criminal, thus vindicating Guthrie and Riley, the response will be pretty much the same. You know what? The real bad guy here is Steph Guthrie and her friends. They're the real instigators. They're the real troublemakers. It was bad enough that Guthrie went after Bendel and Spur, but boy, she got in over her head when she went after Gregory Elliot. She should have left Gregory Elliot the hell alone, but now she's implicated herself, and she has implicated all of feminism. Okay. If I see masses of feminists dogpiling Steph Guthrie for her behavior, I might revise what I just said, but I'm not holding my breath. If the judge should rule that Elliot's behavior was criminal, thus vindicating Guthrie and Riley, the response will be pretty much the same. So it's going to be bad stuff if Guthrie gets convicted. It's going to be bad stuff if Guthrie doesn't get convicted and sent to jail for 6 months. As for Elliot, even if he's acquitted, chances are his life will have been irrevocably damaged. Yes, if you've been following the case, his life has been irrevocably damaged. He's been unable to make a living for a long time now. He's not permitted to use a computer. He has had the unstinting loyalty and devotion of his sons who have gone to bat for him. But he is effectively crippled as far as organizing his own defense against what's being done to him. While we wait for the verdict, it's worth noting, it's worth nothing that this trial has become a proxy war between extremes, a battle between hardline feminists and MRAs. This brutal online battle will continue to escalate, hardening hearts and coarsening our public debate. To that end, regardless of the verdict, we've already lost. Okay, this last paragraph here is the most interesting thing in the entire article. So I'm going to read that again slowly. While we wait for the verdict, it's worth nothing that this trial has become a proxy war between extremes, a battle between hardline feminists and MRAs. Okay, stop right there. This is the mainstream narrative that is forming, or at least some people are trying to form this narrative, that we have the extremists, the extreme hardline feminists, and we have these one group of crazy people and this other group of crazy people who has been arbitrarily labeled as MRAs. Okay, we're not sure who that acronym refers to, but they're out there, and just the crazies, you know, clowns to the left of me, jokers on the right, and all of us nice, sensible people in the middle. That is the narrative, the false narrative that appears to be crystallizing. In fact, the true narrative goes something like this. We have feminism, which is constantly expanding and constantly seeking to colonize more and more cultural territory until it finally takes over. Eventually, it will collapse of its own internal contradictions and irrationality, but that's another story. The real narrative is that feminism is out there, feminism is expanding and trying to suck the rest of the world into the feminist vortex. And there are a few people out there, more and more people who see what's going on. And the nice, sensible people in the middle are basically the ones with blindfolds on. They're the ones with their heads in the sand. They're the ones who don't know what's going on. Eventually, they will have to give up their smug centrism and understand that there is no fence to sit on. There is no middle ground to stand on. That middle ground is a temporary condition. They should enjoy it while it lasts, because that middle ground is going to shrink and get smaller and smaller and smaller. Eventually, they're going to have to pick one side or the other. They go on the side of feminism, or they go on the side of non-feminism. Either you're a feminist or you're not a feminist, and the real line of Armageddon is drawn between those two sectors. And I will take this opportunity to send you to another link. This is Q number 5. Please do go and take a look at that. You may have seen this before. You may not have seen this before. This is the map of reality. This explains in broad terms what's really going on. This is the feminist, non-feminist cooperation spiral. Go there, have a look, study it. You want to get the real deal. You want to get the real straight dope about what's really happening, and to sort out all of this politics. That's it. That's the map of reality, the feminist, non-feminist cooperation spiral. That's Q number 5. Do go and have a look. It's down there in your Q list, down in the low bar. Go and click on that, study that. And I think I'm going to call it quits for that article. We got one more thing here to talk about. Do we have time in the program? Yes, we do. We have about 40 minutes. I think that'll do. This is Q number 6. Let's take a look. Q number 6. This is from the Community of the Wrongly Accused, website formerly known as the False Rape Society. A great website. This is from July 29th, 2015. Safe Campus Act would give students accused of sexual violence lots of protection. 9 reasons I like it. The Safe Campus Act of 2015, sponsored by Republican Representatives Matt Salmon of Arizona and Pete Sessions and Kay Granger of Texas, is a significant bill because it promotes rights for both the accuser and the accused. The latter's interests typically are omitted from legislative efforts. For example, yes means yes. The new bill would create a veritable sea change in the current legal landscape when it comes to handling allegations of sexual violence in the academy. Finally, at long last, persons accused of sexual violence are to be given protections. Here is FIRE's take on it, which is pretty much the last word on this subject. And here's a great illustration of how it works. And that features a couple of links. All of us should urge our representatives to get behind this effort, to sign on to it. And we should all write to our local newspapers to urge our representatives to sign on to it. It should not take much to sell this to the general public. Who can be against fairness? Who indeed? Who can be against fairness? Here are 9 things I like about the new bill. 1. The school's disciplinary action hinges on whether or not the accuser allows the school to report the alleged violation to law enforcement. Getting rapists off the street helps other potential victims of rape, as well as men wrongly accused of rape, since every rape diminishes the perceived integrity of every man accused of rape. Here's what the bill says. If an individual provides a notification to the institution that she does not want the matter investigated by law enforcement, the institution may not initiate or otherwise carry out any institutional disciplinary proceeding with respect to the allegation, including imposing interim measures, but only if the individual includes in the notification a statement that the individual understands the effect under this subparagraph of providing the notification. Boy, that's a tangled web of words right there. 2, police investigations come first. The school's internal disciplinary process is halted while law enforcement investigates. During the period in which a law enforcement agency is investigating a covered allegation reported by an institution under subsection A, the institution may not initiate or otherwise carry out any institutional disciplinary proceedings with respect to the allegation. The school is permitted to impose interim sanctions, but they are of limited duration without a hearing. 3, the schools must hold formal hearings with adequate notice at least 2 weeks before the hearing. This requirement precludes disciplining a student based solely on an investigation. 4, no hiding evidence. I like that. No hiding evidence. The institution shall ensure that all parties to the proceeding have access to all material evidence. All parties to the proceeding have access to all material evidence, including both inculpatory and exculpatory evidence, not later than 1 week prior to the start of any formal hearing or similar adjudicatory proceeding. I would give them 2 weeks, I think. But anyway, such evidence may include, but is not limited to, complainant statements, third-party witness statements, electronically stored information, written communications, social media posts, and demonstrative evidence. 5, lawyers are allowed. This is a big one. The institution shall permit each party to the proceeding to be represented at the sole expense of the party by an attorney or other advocate for the duration of the proceeding, including during the investigation of the allegation and other preliminary stages prior to a formal hearing or similar adjudicatory proceeding, and shall permit the attorney or other advocate to ask questions in the proceeding, file relevant papers, examine evidence, and examine witnesses. Whew, that was a lot. A caveat: the institution shall permit each party to the proceeding to safely confront witnesses, including the complainant, in an appropriate manner, including by submitting written questions to be asked by the person serving as the adjudicator in any formal hearing or similar adjudicatory proceeding. 6, no conflicts of interest. The institution shall ensure that the proceeding is carried out free from conflicts of interest by ensuring that there is no commingling of administrative or adjudicative roles. 7, schools to set their own standard of proof. What does that mean? Schools to set their own standard of proof. This is a big one because it rolls back the infamous Dear Colleague letter's insistence that schools apply a preponderance of the evidence standard. Okay, this is interesting. An institution of higher education may establish and apply such standard of proof as it considers appropriate for purposes of any adjudication carried out as part of an institutional disciplinary proceeding under this section. So the Dear Colleague letter stipulates that they use preponderance of evidence standard. This new legislation would give them the option to set their own standard. Now, I'm a little bit concerned that it does not rule out the separate institution using preponderance of evidence as their standard. If they can set their own standard, I suppose they could just as well set preponderance of evidence as that standard. I would like to see it so that they would have to set a better standard than that, such as clear and convincing. But anyway, I guess this is a step forward. An institution of higher education may establish and apply such standard of proof as it considers appropriate for purposes of any adjudication carried out as part of an institutional disciplinary proceeding under this section. Okay, well, it's a step forward. I like that. Students who sue the school and win get attorney's fees. Nice. That'll make the schools think twice, won't it? A big one, because in most civil litigation in the U.S., prevailing parties don't get their attorney's fees. In any civil action under this subsection, the court may award the prevailing party, other than the institution of higher education, compensatory damages, reasonable court costs, attorney's fees, including expert fees, and any other relief in equity or law that the court deems appropriate. 9. Violations of the new law become a breach of contract. Interesting. Violations of the new law, in other words, this legislation they're proposing, violations of that become a breach of contract. This is a big one that I suspect few commentators will recognize. I guess I'm one of the few because I spotted it just right off the block. When wrongly expelled students sue their colleges, they can't sue for breach of contract unless the particular right was included in a contract with the school, such as a student handbook. If the school is a private institution, the student is without due process protections. So a breach of contract claim is often all he's got. This new bill explicitly says the words of the new law become part of such a contract. Each institution of higher education, which is subject to this part, shall publish annually in the institution's student handbook or equivalent publication a statement of the procedures applicable to institutional disciplinary proceedings under this section, and shall publish such statement in the form of a contract between the institution and its students and student organizations. Okay. The institution violates this new law, it is a breach of contract. Very good. That gives the accused a little bit more leverage there. In fact, quite a bit more leverage. So that's it. That's the article. And that is the summation of the most pertinent points in this new proposed legislation, the Safe Campus Act. The feminists don't like it. The feminists are screaming bloody hell about this. They're trying to block it. Well, this is what we have come to expect of feminists. Anything that tries to restore fairness, at least where fairness applies to male persons, the feminists are against it. Okay, it's part of the pattern. You got to learn to see those patterns. Anything that would give men an even break, feminism is against it. I don't like that because it violates my sense of a just and rationally ordered world. It violates, I guess you would say, my sense of equality, or I should rather say equity. Okay. I don't care about men's rights, since I am not a men's rights person, but I do care about the natural order and correct harmony of the universe. And I speak as a philosopher when I say that. As a philosopher, it grieves me to see the correct order and correct harmony of the universe violated. It grieves me to see my own personal sense of equity in the universe violated. Okay, whether that's happening to a man or a woman. In this case, it's happening to men. And in this case, it's being inflicted by feminism. directly or indirectly. Okay. Take care of feminism's wrongs, address feminism's wrongs in the present case, and men's rights will pretty much fall into place. Men's rights are almost an afterthought to mopping up feminism's wrongs. So I like this Safe Campus Act. It sounds like it's just restoring regular old protection of the law and due process and presumption of innocence and clear and convincing standard of evidence, all of that good stuff. It's ensuring that stuff gets instituted in the institutional setting, not just in the official court of law. Now, the thing to understand here is that these mock trials that they hold on campus, those are not regular courts of law. Okay, they are institutional tribunals, and they have no authority to send anybody to jail or fine anybody. Their authority only goes so far as kicking the person out of the school and giving them a bad record for the rest of their life. And the fact that they are not regular courts of law is what is the loophole that lets them get away with what they're doing. And it looks like, from my reading so far, the Safe Campus Act would correct that and make these institutional tribunals, would pull these institutional tribunals more in line with the regular operations of criminal justice in regular courts of law, so that people are not unjustly treated. See, that's the main thing. People are being unjustly treated, and since this is an issue involving feminism, it is chiefly men who are being unjustly treated, because feminism is either out to get men in some way, or is just, what shall I say, has a depraved indifference to the well-being of men, and is willing to stand by when bad things happen to men. The good feminists are willing to stand by with their arms folded, while the bad feminists go wild and do bad things to men, which is why all feminism is implicated. It's not a question of are all feminists like that. It's a question of is all feminism like that? And yes, in a very overarching sense, all feminism is like that. J'accuse. All feminism is like that. And if you're not down with what I am describing, if you're not supportive of what I am describing now, then I strongly urge you to not call yourself a feminist. Call yourself something else. But the word feminism, no, that's out. The word feminism has a stigma. Doesn't mean anything good. Too many people hide behind that word. Too many people use that word as a shield. Feminism, therefore, has become a refuge of scoundrels. And we got to flush those scoundrels out of their refuge, out into the light where we can see them and hold them accountable. Too many people hiding behind the word feminism. You may be the nicest person in the world, but if you label yourself as a feminist, then you are aiding and abetting all those rogues who operate under the word feminism. Okay, that's my thought on that subject for now. And that's the end of the stuff that we got on the queue list to talk about. We are about 1 hour and 40 minutes into our allotted 2 hours. I think we've had a pretty good program. I think I'm going to wrap it up now. This has been episode number 59 of the Vanguard Report. I think it's been a good show. Nick was not here. Nick will not be here next week, and I think probably the week after that as well. But Nick will be back. So everybody, remember, feminism is is what we say it is. We are the dictionary now. We say what feminism is. That's the only way to get the job done. Feminism is what we say it is. And if you don't like that, you can pretend that feminism is something else, but we don't care. We're going to go on saying what we believe feminism is, and we're going to use the word feminism in line with what we see feminism to be. Effectively, feminism is what we say it is. We are taking back control of the language from feminism. And from there, we are taking back control of the entire cultural narrative. But this goes one step at a time, and language is a good place to start. And a good place to start with language is claiming the word feminism, taking control of the word feminism. So, feminism is what we say it is. And on that note, I should give you our email address very quickly. That is Vanguard Report, one word, Vanguard Report @usa.com. Send your love mail, your hate mail. If you want to send a death threat, you can send it there. Okay? Whatever you want to send, that's it. Vanguard Report @usa.com. So let's wrap it up. Feminism is what we say it is. Everybody, be excellent to each other. Take care, and I'll see you again next week for episode number 60. Ciao.